Hi, everyone. We're about to get started here. So settle. Thank you so much for joining us today at our hiring roundtable. I'm really excited for this conversation. From my perspective, in general, I'm actually really excited about this conference because I feel that WordPress and publishing have a unique and symbiotic relationship. And so I feel like it's really about time these two communities came together to talk a little bit more about how we can work effectively together. And a part of that conversation, and an important part of that, is how we build development teams using WordPress in the publishing space. So I'm very excited to have these lovely people here with me. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves before we get started. So,
I guess because my name starts with A, I'll be the natural beginner. Hi, everyone. My name's Aimee Gonzalez-Cameron. I'm the founder of Aimee Gonzalez Consulting, and my unofficial tagline or the purpose is making learning at work suck less, but if you look me up on the internet, the nicer version is I provide the missing pieces of learning at work or workplace learning and development. So thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm Julia Smith. I'm the Director of Product and Technology at the Institute for Nonprofit News.
Paul Olund. I'm the Director of Product for USA Today Sports.
thank you. We're sharing mics, so this might take some getting used to. So to kick us off, I just want to reiterate a little bit what our goals for this conversation are. There are three main points we're going to be trying to talk about today. The first is the hiring process, pain points in the hiring process, and what we can expect and learn from those to grow beyond them, hopefully. The second is what happens after the hiring process. When you have started to build out your team, you have an end goal in mind for your product and how we can build infrastructures to help develop those teams to get publishers from concept to effective media outlet. And finally, what moving forward as in the publishing space and in the WordPress space we can do to foster that kind of understanding and those relationships better. So to kick off, let's go right to the beginning, I guess, the hiring process, pain points. I think that this is something many of us have experienced either as applicants or as hiring managers. So I'd really like to invite Julia and Paul to talk a little bit about, in a few words, what they experience the pain points to be, and perhaps briefly some of the root causes behind those pain points.
Well, I can just give you a little bit of background about how we use WordPress. So our team supports somewhere in the range of 60 plus WordPress sites that account for, 100 million, 150 million page views a month. And these are all sports centric. So we need developers that have a high level of skill on the WordPress construction side of things, but have also worked in the publishing industry and have an understanding of all the various pieces that sort of circle around the technical needs when we're hiring somebody to fill a role on our WordPress platform team. And it's easy to find a developer. It's a little bit more difficult to find a developer who has worked in the publishing space, but it's even more complicated and challenging to find a developer who's great at all of those things. And so that's sort of where our challenge lies.
And just quickly, any root causes from your side that impact those pain points or exacerbate them?
Well, again, so we have dozens of technologies that we're working with every day. So finding a developer or anybody on the technical side that has spent time with, for example, ad technology or analytics, it's very difficult to find someone and pull them into our team who has extensive experience working with those things. As the goal of a WordPress developer is generally let's build badass plugins and let's build fantastic sites. That those secondary pieces are sometimes overlooked. In our industry in particular, it's incredibly important. So most of the young developers that come in to work with us spend between 3 and 6 months becoming comfortable with those various technologies. before we can let them, go whole hog at developing solutions.
I would second the note about the secondary pieces being really important. My team is really small. There's just 4 of us, and we support up to 120 different nonprofit news sites, actively working on about 30 or so. So what we're looking for when we're hiring is like a good understanding of what newsrooms need, and then also just an aptitude for development. Since we're a development team, but most of our roles are varied. We have 1 lead WordPress developer, a news application developer, and a support lead, and then myself. And then we also hired apprentices too. So mostly what we're looking for is an aptitude for development, for problem solving, for figuring things out and knowing where to go for answers to their questions and how to solve those problems. And then secondarily, we're looking for people who care about media and have some sort of background.
Interesting you brought up aptitude and sort of a curiosity or interest in news in addition to just development skills. I'm curious for both of you, have you been in situations before? So you have obviously products in mind. I know INN also works with partners as well that have end goal products in mind. But it's also publishing, so things have to happen very quickly. So while you have this sort of ideal candidate who has that aptitude and that knowledge about the newsroom, but you'll also have gaps, do you find that you are in positions where you've had to hire specifically for those gaps, despite the fact that that candidate might not have initially fit your idea of what an ideal candidate would be? Is that something you can kind of?
I'd say we do hire for gaps, just in that we are a small team, so if we need a developer, we need a developer. But we try to cast a broad net with our job listings and make sure they get out to diverse communities and are distributed broadly so that we're not, if we're looking for a developer, we're not looking for a developer only on developer job boards. Like, we're looking at other news organizations, we're looking all over the place and trying to make sure that we can get the broader focus that we need, or like that lens.
I mean, we have a super aggressive roadmap, so at the end of the day, we got to ship code, and we need people to fill those gaps. And yes, we hire, like the triage hire, I guess is what we're referring it to, with the expectation that they're going to come in and help us complete projects and get stuff out the door. But the type of person I want on my team is someone that's interested in solving larger problems, wants to make an impact in our industry and help grow our business. Those two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive. But I do find that when you're looking for a short-term hire, there's definitely a tendency to pull somebody in that you know is great on the technical end, but may not, be a fit in a long-term scenario.
So we'll pull back the curtain a little bit, and my whole role is to sort of synthesize and listen to what's going on here, because what I do is listen to people like Paul and Julia, and I try to work with them and their teams and their companies to say, okay, well, let's just pause for a second and let's figure out like what needs to happen then to help you get from only finding triage hires or only finding that hire and really finding the person who you want for what I'm calling the whole body wellness. I used to work in medicine, so those metaphors tend to work well. We all have bodies, so it works. Whole body wellness hire, the person who is going to be part of that team long term and is going to ultimately elevate that team as you work towards that goal, that the roadmap, whatever is on that roadmap, whether it's the next step or 5 years out, whatever. So I don't want to synthesize too much right away, but I do want to also explicitly invite you all, if you're thinking of questions as you're listening. I know it feels a little bit like you're eavesdropping on someone else's lunch conversation and you're like the next table over. So that's not how we want you to feel. We actually really hope that you'll be able to identify with what Paul and Julia are talking about and that you'll maybe something will strike a chord with you and you'll have a question that you can either talk with us at the end or afterwards, or if you have something for me, that's fine too. But we're hoping to kind of paint that picture for you and then invite you to reflect a little bit or create more possibility for different question asking for you. So there's no answers, but we do hope that we'll excite you about this kind of arduous task or process. And get you a little bit revved up to think about it differently for when you go back to your job.
I mean, just really quickly, to give you a little bit of context, we've been searching for a lead developer now and for, I guess, 4 months, which is why I was excited to be on this panel, because it's a real challenge. Like, this is something that I deal with every day. It's incredibly frustrating. So sort of trying to break it down into digestible takeaways is, if we can come away with this with some ideas on how we can approach hiring and bringing people into organizations that are a good fit, not just for them, but for us, and not just for us, but for them. And that's super exciting.
Anything else?
Yeah, I guess I'll add to that. We're a nonprofit, so we're a mission-driven organization. So in all of our hiring, we try to put a lot of effort on the why behind what we do and making sure that people are that they also care. So we wind up with a team that is extremely, extremely mission-driven, which is just good. We all have the same goals in mind, even when we're working on different projects with different technologies.
Well, assuming that everybody here has spent time in publishing, I don't think anybody here got into the industry because they wanted to be a millionaire. So there has to be a sense of purpose behind what you do every day, or else you're not going to go to work. And so hiring a developer who wants to check a bunch of boxes off of a list and then go home and forget about what they did that day and not think about the larger picture, we don't have room for those type of people, those types of developers on our staff, because we have such a small team. We need everybody to care and want to really build great consumer experiences so that we can tell fantastic stories.
So when you're speaking to applicants, both Julia, Paul, and you're trying to determine if someone has that same passion for telling great stories or your mission that you do, obviously when you bring someone onto the team, you want them to be engaged and propelling the organization a little bit further. So what kinds of things have you been doing to identify those traits in candidates, and are there things that you wish you could do or would like to do more of in that process?
One thing we do is that we put out our entire hiring process. We just publish it on GitHub, actually, and so then whenever we have a new job posting, it should be very easy for the applicant to go read through that documentation and sort of see what we're about, and just like get a good picture of who our team is and what we're doing. So we wind up during the interview process, asking the questions like, did you actually look at our GitHub profile, and did you read this documentation that we put out? And then, if so, and hopefully so, usually so, they'll point out particular things about it that spoke to them or appealed to them. Like, they'll make an effort to, let us know what.
Are you amazed at how frequently you get people apply that have not looked at one thing that you've constructed, like one product you've ever built?
Yes. But we don't talk to them either, so.
So the screening process is a challenge, and we're talking about and interviewing in general, right? Is more of an art and certainly not a science, but we try to put some science behind it when we can. I was telling them earlier that one role we had, this was earlier this year, we had like 400 applicants, which it's literally impossible for me to go through every one. So we try to use some intelligent filtering to pull people out that may be good fits. But I try to look at every single person's resume, and one of the first things I look for is passion projects, what they've done that they haven't been paid to do. And that tells me that they're coming into this wanting to work on really cool shit, and the money and some of the perks that come along with working with a large company is secondary. Not just looking for a nice resume builder. They actually want to contribute to what we're doing as an organization.
On the passion project topic, though, we try to actually not look at passion projects too much, just from a diversity perspective. some people don't have time for passion projects because of family and other various things. So we do try to focus more on like the work that they were paid to get done and not put too much of an effort on their individual contributions to their GitHub profile or something like that. We care that they're able to do the work, but if they're not doing it in their free time, great.
The passion project can extend past just their desire to build a plugin that parses cooking recipes, online. It can be volunteer work, and definitely extend outside of what they do on a day-to-day.
So one of the questions that I'm thinking about, and maybe you are too, is isn't that interesting that there's such a mismatch between who comes in, who's applying, and the values and things that are put forth in presumably very clear job descriptions, very open, transparent, Given all of that, there's still a mismatch. So one of the interesting things that we talked about earlier was how it's written or how it's put out there and kind of the motive behind it. So we talked about this tension between, am I a publisher or am I a developer? When I'm learning about what I want to do and I'm arriving at this point in my life, in this career, when I went to college, that's when the silo thinking started. I picked a major. I hung out with people in my major. Maybe I minored, but interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary stuff wasn't very common. And I remember in grad school at NYU, they had a center where you could just go and say, I care about this, I want to make a degree out of it. And I'm like, what the heck? And I went back to my little, international relations and political economy silo and was like, you're weird. But that is something that could be really interesting to think about in terms of this, because that mismatch potentially starts to get addressed when we say, okay, we know everybody went to school or taught themselves. Either way, though, they've arrived at this point with maybe one label or two, and we're actually trying to find somebody who balances publisher and developer, or nonprofit, mission-driven, but developer, or whatever. And so how can we write our job descriptions, or how do we talk about who we want in a way that maybe starts to get at that more clearly? And that's an open-ended question to just think about. Something that I'll just add to that is that in the academic discipline of program evaluation, we have a semester-long course just on writing surveys, because the way you ask that question is the answer you'll get. And all of you know that because you're smart and you're in publishing, you're in journalism. Your job is to get the story. And you know that when you get the story that you want, it's because you're asking questions that are very nuanced and thoughtful and specific. And it's no different in a more, in a completely different field of HR. And so that also, there's some clues there that can help lend to this endeavor of, okay, well, great, she says rewrite our job description. How the heck are we going to do that? There are ways.
I mean, job description writing is painful. Anyone here has done it. Reading them is even more painful. I think one potential takeaway from this conversation, we were chatting about this earlier, is most people that look at a job description are going to assume that everything on that list has to be met before you apply for that job. And that the reality is that we don't hire that way. I mean, I could say you need 5 years of PHP experience or something, and if someone comes in with 3 years of PHP experience and 5 years...
Women do think they need to meet all the requirements. I have data.
I'm telling you. At our organization, don't feel like the description mandates you meet all the criteria. So that's sort of, from my perspective, where the screen comes in, and then we can start to evaluate whether or not it's going to be a good fit. But I sort of use that description as a guide, but not a mandate.
Oh, I think we're going to hold question. We have a question and answer period at the end, so not to worry. Hold on to it. Okay, just orienting. I want to make sure we hit all of our strong points. I think, that's really, it is an interesting takeaway. When we're looking at job descriptions, I think a lot of people as applicants go down the list and try and tick off all the boxes if they don't. So knowing that, from a hiring manager's perspective, it is a more nuanced.
Somebody that sees the job and is like, this job looks fucking amazing, I want it, as opposed to, I only meet 75% of what they're asking this person to do. Because I mean, that 25% can be taught, and there's that 25% that might be missing. They probably have 25% of extra skills that are going to be applicable to what we're doing anyway. So that job description hole is so frustrating for me, but I don't have a good way around it, unfortunately. Aside from meeting people at conferences like this, so feel free to apply. That's a call out. As a bit.
And something, your last comment raised another thought for me, and it's something that, in preparing for this panel, I think we've all thought about a little bit, and that is going to segue, I guess, into the next kind of high point, which is once you have hired someone, or in the second half of the hiring process, when you are looking just beyond the skills of, PHP or language skills, to things like critical analysis of problem solving, how those play into a decision, because as you said, a lot of those other skills can be taught if you have that aptitude, I think, which Julia brought up earlier. So if either of you can speak to that, like how you look at, I guess, what some people call maybe soft skills, I guess. Maybe Aimee has a better word for that, but yes, what is it? Tell us.
No, I haven't gotten as far as a new label, but they're definitely not soft. They're harder than developing.
Yeah,
so complex interpersonal skills, I don't know. That's the closest I've come. Human to human skills, because you've got human to computer interaction, computer to computer interaction, server to server, and human to human interaction.
I think that's a good way to put it. So how do you kind of bridge that gap from, the checklist of technical skills someone might need to know, to assessing their human-to-human skills, and making a decision from there that, this person has those human-to-human skills, they'll be able to pick up a language when we bring them on.
Well, so part of the reason why this post has probably been unfilled for 4 months is that our interview process is semi-arduous. The applicant has to meet every single person on our team, and I said there's like 12 people. So that right there is a process in itself. We like to bring them on site if possible, but we're spread all across the country, so we'll usually try to get them into the New York office to meet with the development team. But getting a gauge, just doing Hangouts, we do face-to-face as much as possible, no phone calls, and that's the best way that we can gauge. A good example is we had a really, really qualified candidate, but he was incredibly difficult to read, and I couldn't get a good gauge on whether or not he would be a cultural fit. And so we brought him into the office, and he was fantastic. He just wasn't great on a Hangout, in a Hangout scenario, which is totally understandable. They're super uncomfortable, and nobody wants to be in them. And so those types of processes, despite the fact that they're sort of fluid, right? We don't have I think you have like a 3-month, or you have a 3-month contract window when someone's hired to sort of gauge whether or not, right? Whether or not they are a good fit. We don't have that, so we try to do as much as we can.
We don't actually do it, but it's part of technically. But another thing on the what you were just saying about Hangouts versus in person. So our team's entirely remote. So we really have to sort of rely on how comfortable people are with Zoom or Hangouts or our sort of remote working tools.
So it seems like there are kind of, when you're in that process though, like different ways that you interact with a person to assess like their skill or whether they're a cultural fit. So even though your team is remote, like it sounds like at USA Today you guys have like calls, they come in and meet people in person, they probably provide you with some work. So is there a way that as a remote team you're able to kind of check in on an applicant in different contexts so that you can maybe get a fuller picture of how they would fit? Because I think Paul raises a good point, like, some people operate way better in text or might be uncomfortable face-to-face until they meet people, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we try to gauge individuals more by sort of asking, I'm trying to say here, I like asking a lot of the when have you been in this situation before sort of questions, both for hard skills or the other sort of hard skills. Human. But both for actual problem solving, for like code and that sort of thing, but also for interpersonal communication. So asking like, when did you have a hard time communicating with someone, or when did you have an interpersonal problem that you had to resolve, and how did you do that? Like those sorts of things we think are important to just seeing how people think and react in tricky situations.
Yeah, I mean, we're horribly cruel to the applicants that make it past the first stage, because we do the live coding test and we get to watch you fumble around. But it's not so we can see how successfully you're able to accomplish a task, because, as you know, that's not real life. You're not sitting there without the ability to look up online and get code hacks and tips, and so it's not a real life experience. It's really just to sort of gauge your ability to think and talk things out with us and get an idea of how you would react under certain situations, pressure, which is the reality of being on a small team with a lot of demands on our time. But once that piece is complete, then yeah, it's all about making sure that the fit is there culturally and that they drive with the team.
So this does move our conversation along into that onboarding and retention and keeping the employee there. But the question is, if the two of you could unpack the idea of culture fit, because that is, having worked in Silicon Valley, that is the way that you keep women and minorities out of jobs. I'm going to call it out. So what does that mean for you guys, for you two, sorry, and let's break that down a little bit, because I do think that matters. Your team's chemistry matters. I've watched teams be destroyed and taken apart, and people have moved on, and the team dissipated because the chemistry was not there. And that's what we're really trying to get at, but I think without naming those components of what we're looking for, it becomes very dangerous and very easy to leave people out that aren't like us.
Yeah, from that culture fit perspective, we just try to avoid questions that sort of get to that. So we try not to ask, like, what are your hobbies? Where are you from? What do you like to do on the weekends? Like things that, where the answers would sort of lead to class-based questions or other sorts of, demographic cuts. So we try to avoid that and really stick to just what our mission is and the types of products that we're trying to develop, and just sort of not get too personal when we're actually chatting.
I mean, our conversations are super open. It's, what are your interests? What do you like to do? Why? And then ensuring that the dude or gal is not a prick is like goal number one, so that they can get along with people. I mean, I want people on the team that are pleasant to be around. Makes going to work every day much, much easier, right? So, and a challenge of ours also is that despite the fact we do have an office in New York, a majority of our team is remote. So some people are not comfortable working in a remote environment, so that's a big part of it as well.
This is the part now where I've made you all super uncomfortable, and I'm gonna give you the catharsis you need. You two actually already started to answer the question a little bit, because when we say culture fit, I think what we're really trying to say is, do you care about this the way I do? Do you have the same passion? Are you trying to solve the same problem as me? Are you here because you see the pain point of the job I need you to do, and you're interested in taking that job and turning it into the key that moves us forward because you care the way I care? And even just changing the language to make that the kind of thing you're thinking about when you're writing the job description, or you're bringing that person in, or you're defending that person as a new hire, vote up or vote down, or you're onboarding them, because I hope you have an onboarding process. That I hope you do, and if you don't, let's talk. So that's really what we're trying to get at, and that's so much easier to access regardless of anything else, because that passion and that problem solving becomes the unifier, and it takes away all of the other kind of like emotionally charged stuff that's there.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of ties into what happens after that hire is made, like what steps, onboarding you mentioned as one of them, and an important one. As publishing companies, are you taking to make sure that that person remains engaged and is able to continue pursuing that same passion that the rest of the organization is aiming for. Julia, you said you had something.
Yeah, so on the onboarding process, we have a really robust and well-documented onboarding process. And if any of you are interested, it's on GitHub. But what we do, it lasts for a long time, and we wind up having everyone go through all of our mission documents, all of our repos, all of our documentation for our products, and then we spend a ton of time pair programming with people right when they're coming into the organization. So a lot of time just sort of pairing people up with everyone else on the team, so you can kind of get to know what their role is compared to what yours is, learn from them, and just like get totally up to speed.
Same. I mean, we pair new developers with more seasoned, at least seasoned at our organization, with the goal of just that knowledge trade-off and building some redundancy, which is an important part of continuing to build our team.
So I think that's interesting that you both have pair programming, and I think pair programming is an awesome thing to do, especially when you're bringing someone new on. But one thing I'm interested in exploring a little more with you both is you both mentioned that one of the most important things for people that when you're in the application process is identifying whether or not they also share that passion for your mission or for telling great stories, which kind of falls outside of like pair programming. It's something that's I think broader than that within the environment of the organization. So how do you encourage people to explore that passion that interested or made them a successful applicant in the first place, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think so. So I mean, there's some practical things that we do. We employ like a 90-10 work week, so we have 10% set aside for passion projects, which has been successful. There's been a lot of really great work that's been done as a result of that, and that allows us as a team to focus on things that may seem a little bit more experimental, and it also allows me as someone who's trying to manage our priorities and keep people engaged. It allows me to sort of see where the interests of the team lie, so that I can say this person's super interested in this. Let's have them focus on projects of the like. So it has served us really well.
Anything?
Okay. And a lot of my stuff would be hypothetical at this point, like offering advice and how people can do that. Because I have worked in environments where learning is considered a luxury and everything was due yesterday and we have deadlines, and this is like, why the hell would I spend time, would I spend time on this? This is separate. That's what I hear a lot from whatever company that I'm working with. This is separate. So the question I would ask then is, if you're sitting there and you're like, oh God, we don't have a 90-10. I don't think I could ever get that from my boss. Then maybe there's ways of building in learning moments to the day, or walking yourself through what you already do and naming those things as learning moments and seeing if you can put some cohesion around what you're already doing. Because I know that that's a huge struggle for people when they can't have a 90-10. And when I do ask about learning at work and cultures of learning, that's usually what people talk about. But it can be a lot more than that. That's a great option, but it's not always feasible. So there are other options. It's just about making sure to ask questions.
One other thing we do to always be learning, so we put out a newsletter every week. And in that newsletter, each member of our team puts like the best thing they read. So just to find something to contribute to the newsletter every week, we have to go find something interesting and then share it both with our team and then to our broader like newsletter subscribers. And it winds up being just a fun way to sort of, one, keep up to date on things, and then two, obviously like get to know your coworkers a lot better and see what they're interested in and the things that they care about and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing that we try to do as a team, well, I should say that I attempt to do, is just to help ensure that there is a understanding of impact. And what I mean by that is, I always thought, I started on the print digital side, or was, I guess it was print at the time. Yeah, I'm old. Print, and then the sort of on the journalism track, and moved into digital, and then into sort of the product sphere. But I always, every single role that I had, I always considered myself to be a journalist, regardless if I was writing code or if I was telling stories, like literally telling stories. And I think that that's something that I hope everybody that works out of the sports media group at USA Today understands, that everything they do has a larger impact. It helps our writing team write and produce great content. It helps our video team create great video stories. And ensuring that they understand the type of impact they're having is incredibly important.
So for both of you, are there ways that you track those interests and help people to push further? And one of the things that you mentioned is seeing people who are able to solve problems that are not necessarily handed to them, but like identifying problems beforehand. And some of that falls into the passion, like they're passionate, they're going to be looking for solutions. So in these passion projects, when someone, or like articles they're interested in, topics they're exploring, how do you help them to use that as a stepping stone to the next point? And then how, as a follow-up, do you incorporate that into your product roadmaps?
So we wind up sort of noticing trends in people's interests and what they'd like to learn, and incorporating that into just general, goal setting meetings and benchmarking and that sort of thing, just for the individual employee. And then we also try to, find opportunities in our product development to put those skills to work and give them some real life experience in whatever they're trying to learn.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we have a pretty robust roadmap, and there's room for everybody to take on an interest that it helps us build towards our milestones. And again, we do definitely notice interests and trends of interest for specific people, and so giving them a level of ownership over projects, as opposed to just asking them to develop a component of a project, is a really useful and powerful way for us to do that. That way they own the outcome, the quality tends to improve as a result, and they get to key in on something that they're passionate about.
So this is not necessarily about passion projects or side things, but I used to work at a company where there was no time for passion projects and things like that. I didn't see any evidence of it, but we did dedicate a lot of energy to sharing with each other what each other was working on, and so that became kind of like a teaching and learning, or a culture of learning in and of itself. It was still related to the work we were all there to do, but it was a chance for us to be a community, take a break, and then hear from each other. And so when I ran that program, I conscientiously introduced teaching skills to those people, because the last thing you want is to take a break and then get up there for an hour and listen to or talk to people and have them not listen to you because you're talking past them. So by conscientiously making that a rewarding thing to share what you're learning and what you know and what you're working on, whether it's a side thing or your actual paid work, conscientiously having teaching skills instilled in you and then being able to then check for learning on the side was huge. And so one thing that you could do, if maybe at your company, if you have a learn day or a share day, like I used to work at an agency where one Friday a month was share day and we would do that kind of thing. If I were measuring that, I'd be listening to the questions that the audience asks, and I'm going to make you feel very scared. I'm sorry, I won't do this to you. But I'm looking for, is it a clarifying question or a critical thinking question? Because when you're learning, the questions you ask are going to be indicative to the teacher of, did I say this clearly enough, or does this person need me to do that again and explain it differently? If that's a clarifying question. It's not a bad thing, but that's just where they're at. If they've gotten it and it's landed, now they're incorporating it into their knowledge and they're asking you questions that extend your topic, or they're showing you that they're incorporating it into their own topic. That's critical thinking, and now they're really building that knowledge. They're learning something. So just even something like what kinds of questions are being asked of the audience will let you know what kind of learning is going on. How effective was that teaching? Was this something worthwhile for everybody in the room? Should we do this more?
So I think we only have maybe a minute or two left. 5 minutes? Oh, okay. But before we end, since we do have this opportunity, we're all here together, I do want to talk a little bit about how coming out of this conversation, those of us who are coming from the WordPress community and those of us who are coming from the publishing community can continue to or improve communication across, engendering that curiosity and engagement with publishing and building it into our goals and aspirations as WordPress developers and members of the WordPress community, whether you're an event organizer or if you're working in education or project management. So I would love to hear from all of you with regard to that. Like, so coming out of this, we can all kind of maybe take something away and think about how, you know, we are at the next WordCamp or the next time we're speaking with our client in publishing, we can have just a little bit more empathy about what our needs are.
Well, I mean, there isn't a great guide on how to become a powerful contributor as a WordPress developer in the large publishing space. So I mean, this conversation today in the conference is a good start. But having real discussions about the skill sets required to really succeed, I think is also something that leads into further discussion, for sure. I mean, some of these things aren't sexy to talk about, but the reality that we do need people who are great at integrating ad platforms into the WordPress environment. That's a reality. Same thing with analytics and all of these other tangentials that we talked about. And so talking about sort of who we are and what we do as we're building these experiences for our news consumers, sports news consumers, entertainment news consumers, whatever, you know, being real about what we're expecting and helping facilitate education to get people there.
Yeah, I think one bridge that I would like to gap is sort of the why behind each side does what they do. So if you're a developer, you know, showing developers why the news organizations or the publishers care about a certain thing, and then on the flip side, also communicating, you know, development concerns back to the journalists who may not understand or care to understand, like, why something in their CMS is the way it is, and then again going back and trying to take their feedback and then incorporate that into your product roadmap instead of just leaving it. Our team does, just because our clients are editorial, so we have to. we're not. They're so small, the organizations that we work with, that they don't have their own technical staff, so it's a lot of direct publisher to product sort of interaction.
Hopefully no one on the WordPress training team will kill me, but I'm excited that there is a WordPress training team. It exists. It's out there. I'm on it. And this kind of conference and this conversation and the questions that you have, things you're thinking about, I'm interested in that because I know we have a particular focus right now, but I think out of this conference and this conversation, knowing that there's kind of a mismatch of the enthusiasm to develop in WordPress and knowing that it's kind of like not necessarily landing on any particular industry's needs, and how do we direct that or make that more of a thing? So not just getting good at developing WordPress and here's how, here are the lessons, but also how do you ground that in a real world context for the passion or the problem you're trying to solve, the thing that keeps you up at night that you're using your skills to actually work on, and making that more contextually based. So I have a lot to think about there, and I'm happy to hear from anybody else who wants to add. In general, I know we're kind of running over now, so.
Cool. Okay, well, I thank the three of you for participating. And yeah, can we do questions? Oh, no. Okay, find us after.
Find us after, because I know you had a question. And then if anyone else has questions,
yes, the
find us.
gentleman
We'll be happy
in the
to talk.
Back corner. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing and speaking with you all over the next couple of days. Thank you.